All right, I'm going to accept the recordings occurring. Like Melissa said, thanks everyone so much for your time. We tremendously appreciate it. I'm going to go briefly over our process today. We'll introduce ourselves as your presenters, and then Melissa is going to go over some of the expected takeaways you should all have by the end of our conversation today. We're going to define what health equity is and why it matters, and start to discuss how to talk about the concept. Then we're going to have our first breakout session where participants are going to communicate some of their goals for health equity in their region. After that breakout session, we'll come together. So as a larger group, we'll hear about some of those goals and takeaways. Then we're going to get into the heart of the training, which is how to discuss health equity, including community benefits and risks, options for how to frame health equity narratives, and how to prepare to speak to different audiences in different ways. After that, we're going to go into our second set of breakout rooms for a hands-on conversation around a series of hypothetical situations and discussing how we might handle them. Finally, we'll reconvene one more time for a quick share out and program close. The materials we use today, including this presentation, will be shared with folks in your inboxes early next week, along with a short survey so you can give us some feedback on how we did today. Overall, our big picture goal is to be able to give you all tools to talk about health equity. Many of these tools, I think when you first hear about them, will seem simple and almost self-evident, but I think through processes like discussing the hypothetical cases, you'll see that it's often easier said than done. We can get into some of the subtleties of how these tools can be used in practice.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Lizzie Atwood-Wills. I know, or I've met many of you, and I think many of you know me now by having worked with CLHO here during the communications sort of contract for the session through Stuart Collective. I've also worked with CLHO as a lobbyist previously for AOC. So Stuart Collective is a public affairs firm that's been providing communications to CLHO for a few months now. We were asked to host this training for CLHO members and community partners about how to discuss health equity. So I'm just going to move on to allowing my colleagues to introduce themselves, as I know that you haven't met them before.
Hi, my name is Ethan Crow. I use he, him pronouns. I have the privilege of working at Stuart Collective, where I advise a number of clients and candidates for elected office. Have the privilege of advising a number of candidates, winning candidates, these last 2 years in the period where terms like equity have become increasingly politicized. So whether it was advising successful candidates for school board, statewide office, legislature, or 2 major county positions, had a lot of experience recently in dealing with how these issues play out in the public sphere, and excited to share some of those insights.
Thanks, Ethan. My name is Melissa Walton Hendricks. My pronouns are she, her. I've been here at Stuart Collective for a little less than a year. My work here centers on media relations, both helping clients get into and stay out of the press, government relations, helping folks with some of that proactive outreach and also reactive responses when they hear from elected officials, some direct public outreach on behalf of clients, typically via social media and newsletters, and then strategic recommendations whenever folks need it. Before Stuart Collective, I worked for the city of Portland for 4.5 years, largely on internal policies and procedures around employee equity, waste reduction, and the city's Green Fleet transition project. And prior to that, I was in the Oregon Senate for 3 years as a legislative aide and policy analyst. So that's us, that's the team. So just really briefly, an overview of expected takeaways today, and just digging in with a little more detail of what we'll be going through. First, we're going to get to a shared definition of what health equity is, why it's important. And then we're going to jump into those first breakout groups, which are roughly based on the size of your county and your communications infrastructure. And then that session, we'd really like you guys to talk about your regional and individual goals, or maybe current challenges that you're having around communicating health equity. After we share out those goals, see if there's commonalities across group size. That's when we're really going to dig into the training with risks and benefits and just some additional detail on how to talk about and frame those issues. And then we'll start giving you some of the tools in the toolkit, and really focus on talking to specific audiences, including elected officials, the media, and the general public, including through the use of social media. And then in our second breakout session, We'll be going through some fictionalized case studies to apply what we've talked about today, and then come back together one more time to report out. And then when we send out that health equity toolkit, in addition to the presentation, we'll have some tools that are probably going to be referenced today that you'll be able to use to apply these tools going forward to your work.
First, before we dig into this slide, well, we'll define some key terms and ideas that we'll dig into throughout our conversation today. I want to throw it open to the group. Does anyone want to try to define health equity in their own words? Oh, I see a hand.
The simplest form would say the opportunity for everyone to achieve their optimal health.
That's a great definition. It aligns essentially almost perfectly with the working definition we'll use for this training, which, if we can pop that up on the screen, is from the Kaiser Family Foundation. Health equity generally refers to individuals achieving their highest level of health through the elimination of disparities in health and healthcare. So that's exactly right. When Chloe reached out to Stuart Collective about preparing this presentation, you all made it clear you did not want us to linger on a few things that you all are quite familiar with, so I'm going to touch on them ultra briefly, but there is a definition of health equity in statute that will be included in the materials that we'll send you next week. Again, I don't want to linger on that, but it does exist as a statutory requirement. And then a second thing that you did not want us to linger on is that there are organs public health policy goals that public health bodies are required to endeavor towards, and those are housed within the Oregon Health Policy Board and the Health Equity Committee. So again, I don't want to linger on those, but those do exist. Next, I want to define what we'll go into more detail later, which is community benefits and risk, which you can think about as how to discuss health equity to various audiences in terms of their self-interest. So health equity principles obviously benefit the individuals that may directly receive resources or care implemented by a health equity action, but the benefits aren't limited to just the person directly being served. Many of the health disparities impacting your community, if addressed by a health equity policy, can improve the health of the entire community, which then has many downstream positive effects. So community benefits and risks is how we'll talk about self-interest, both in terms of the positive and obviously the negative, the most tangible example of that being communicable disease and how health equity policy can help mitigate the risk of communicable disease. Finally, we're going to talk about narrative framing. One of the wisest people I ever worked with in politics said to me that you can never change anyone's mind. You can only show them that they always agreed with you. They just didn't know it yet. So we're going to talk about how to frame the principles and values and tangible benefits of health equity policies without using buzzwords like equity, which have become increasingly politicized and may cause folks to have a defensive or negative reaction, or just may simply be too academic for many audiences.
Okay, so we are going to put a link to a Jamboard into the chat here, and this is going to be our first opportunity for you all to break out. Melissa, Ethan, and I will each join one of these groups. And as we mentioned earlier, we are going to try to group you into generally similar sort of communications resources or regional areas where you might have overlapping similarities or challenges or goals. And so I'm going to explain the directions a little bit more, and then Laura, I'll direct you to split us up. So now that you have access to this Jamboard link, we have used Jamboard before. It's a pretty interactive tool. We're just going to have you take notes in there so that at the end of the first breakout group, we can sort of report out and share what we've each discussed with the larger group. And what we're going to do in this first group is we want you to discuss your goals around health equity. So whether that's specific programs you'd like to stand up, just simply meeting statutory requirements, resources you could use to better support your work, or you can even share about the work that you're currently doing and how you'd like to build on it. So we do want to make sure to allow space for everybody in the group to speak if they would like to. So do be mindful of the amount of time that you take up. But the idea, again, behind grouping you all in like-sized, grouping you in like-sized counties is to help you discover where you have overlap. And then ideally in that share out process, at the end, we might also come to realize that there's more overlap than we thought among larger, medium, and small counties too. So please do identify a spokesperson before you finish your breakout group just to report back. Ideally, it's not one of us speakers as your facilitators. We are happy to take notes for you in the Jamboard if that's better for the group process, but we'd like for you all to take up some of the space in sharing out what you discussed. Okay, did I miss anything? We're doing this for about 20 minutes. We're gonna break out now.
I think, Laura, if you could just pause the recording while we're in the breakout room, that way anyone who's watching it doesn't have a 20-minute black screen, and then we'll restart it when we come back. Otherwise, I think we're ready.
Okay, I'm gonna open.
Oh, and I guess everyone, it's good sometimes.
It looks like we have everyone back, Melissa and Ethan.
Okay. Melissa, Ethan, is it my turn?
I believe Melissa, if you want to chat us through each of the groups that we're covering. Do we have Melissa back? For now, I guess let's just get started. Lizzie, I don't know who wants to share out from your group.
We had a tough time finding a volunteer in our small group. Is there anybody who'd like to speak up at this point to share the conversation that happened in group number 3?
I told my group, and it's a promise for the small group too. You'll get really sick of hearing the 3 of us talk, and there is another breakout.
I'll do it. I'll do it.
Thank you, Carrie. Appreciate it.
I do not pay great attention. My mind wanders. So thanks for capturing the notes. I definitely took some really basic notes, but I think that we talked a lot about establishing our community health assessment goals, strategic planning goals, really incorporating the health equity work into the things that we're already doing as local public health. We talked a lot about increasing our capacity with staff in terms of hiring staff, recruiting staff, really looking at how we could utilize the resources that are available to us in ways that benefit the community, benefit our entire department. I think, some of us are from really small counties. So we have one bilingual person working in our health department, and they get pulled into multiple programs, and this really puts a burden on them. And so really looking at strategies for how we could support them in doing that work, but not get overwhelmed, looking at external resources like Genie, and I know we're looking at Linguava and some interpretation options. We are again looking at increasing our materials and resources through the increasing our materials in multiple languages that meet the needs of our community. Just looking at your sticky notes. Building trust. So that was what I said. I feel like for me, the primary goal is building trust with the community and using the resources that are available to us. Florence talked about building upon the success of the pandemic and the partnerships we developed there. And I feel like that's absolutely one of our goals and the strategies that we're using, and we've incorporated into our annual goals and are really looking at that as well. Just really quickly, we talked about the fact that we need money, staff, and training to operationalize these things. Like, we can't do it without more investment of resources. It's just not possible. And then we talked about a few challenges, waiting times for interpreters, and then navigating the external requirements and the current resources that are available to us. So if my group wants to add anything else, please jump in.
Thank you so much, Carrie. That's really helpful. Was there anyone else from the small group that wanted to pop in with anything else?
No, I just wanted to say thank you, Carrie, for jumping in.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so let's jump to the medium-sized group. That was the one that was moderated by Ethan. Was there someone who volunteered in that group?
Yes, there was.
Great.
That was me. Hi, everybody. Jennifer Little from Klamath. So I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of the same things, but just our goals are educating the community, kind of like what Carrie had talked about, building trust within the community, providing resources and information. One big thing that kind of went on all of our categories was like finding more people to be engaged who represent minority populations without it always being the same person or same few people. And just taking a good hard look at what our health equity programming and activities look like internally and externally in the health departments. We all need more money. So public health modernization, hopefully we get lots of it. And also just getting buy-in from the community, elected officials, people not necessarily ingrained in health equity work, like somebody mentioned, HR, IT, those kinds of departments. Certainly part of the money thing, we need more FTE to do all of this really great work, and having more support on communications. So it's really great that we're having this meeting today. And again, like some of these challenges are part of the goals, part of the resources, but need more money, need buy-in from the community, particularly elected officials. And then also just like a lot of miscommunication about what this work looks like of, oh, well, you don't care about the majority, or that's not what health equity means to me, or anything like that. And then there's a desire for concrete tools that we can operationalize and not just like talk in general about health equity. End of report.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Was there anybody in the medium-sized group that wanted to tag on with one more thing, or I thought that was a great summary? Thank you. Okay. Well, we'll close out with the large group, which was my group. And I believe Jackson had volunteered to be our spokesperson. Jackson, would you share out some of the goals and resources and challenges we talked about today?
Sure. I think overall, you know, the big picture of this that I heard in our group is really having equity ingrained in our counties, not just a buzzword. We want to make sure that we can implement internal equity and also dealing with external equity with partners, and really a goal of having internal recruitment strategies to diversify the workforce and have equity training and culturally responsive trainings for staff as a whole. And when we're doing, I know in Jackson County for our community health assessment work, to really have more representation from historically marginalized communities. So the resources are needed. Of course, we always need staff and so forth. But also we talked a lot about having talking points to help navigate the political environment that most of us experience when we talk about equity. Or in the challenges, equity can be a non-starter for a lot of folks. It kind of triggers some people. And there was also a mention of COVID having impact, starting work, then putting it on pause, and then re-engaging in that work. And another challenge is, how do we, related to the way we talk about equity or achieve the goals, is how do we talk about health equity without calling it health equity? And that's it.
Thank you, Jackson. That's great. So I think going through all three, some commonalities that I heard across the groups. I know I saw on at least 2 sets of the slides that some folks are going through the bar high assessment or thinking about it or going through implementations. That might be some good connections to build today. I know there was a brief discussion in our group, but I know I also saw it on one of the other slides. I also heard a lot about internal training for staff, both in our group and in other groups. And also trying to do some more robust engagement with historically marginalized communities, so you're not going to the same people over and over again. And then, of course, resources needed, money and staff and talking points, and some challenges being, how to connect with folks who don't understand it or are opposed to health equity. And then also just sort of moving into the next phase after COVID and resources changing and priorities changing. Were there other sort of shared takeaways that folks heard, Ethan or Lizzie or anyone else?
I just thought that one of the last things that Jackson said was a great segue into what we'll be talking about today. The need for talking points, the need for being able to communicate with different audiences, where we know that public health is in the middle of a lot of different places, communicating with different kinds of people and having to meet all those folks where they're at in trying to meet your goals. So a great segue. Thanks, Jackson. And we'll be able to move right into that.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Lizzie. I was just about to say that last post-it was the perfect segue. So after all these conversations, just really briefly, I want to throw it open to the group one more time. Does anyone want to define health equity in their own terms, particularly without using some of the typical academic buzzwords based on sort of our conversations? Anyone want to take a try at that? I see a hand up.
When I normally talk about health equity, I say that everyone has the same just and fair opportunity to be as healthy as possible.
I like it a lot. It's talking about values, and we're going to get into that in just a second. Just 3 real quick reminders. Here's the working definition from the Kaiser Family Foundation. There are statutory requirements, and there are Oregon's public health goals. Again, Claude requested we not linger on those, but I am going to circle back to them because they can be sort of a helpful thing for you rhetorically at a certain point. So the main thing I'm going to talk about here is community benefits and risks, which again, we spoke about as how to frame health equity in terms of self-interest to a variety of different communities, particularly how to do it without politicized or academically. So implementing health equity principles can, of course, improve the lives of those directly receiving services, but it also benefits the community at large. That if we have a healthier community, then there's more opportunity for economic growth, and there's more opportunity for fewer people to be involved in public safety altercations or other things which are a huge cost to the community. So I think always framing health around economic benefits is extremely important. Another key thing that is going to be very tangible in folks' minds when you talk about their self-interest for community benefits is that the last 3 years have reminded us just how interconnected our individual health is to the community health. There's perhaps no more concrete example than communicable disease. If I'm unwell and I'm communicating that disease to other people, and there's not public health resources around education and public health investments that may have mitigated the spread of that disease, then as we've seen the last few years, that's businesses affected by people not coming into work, that's people spending less money, that's taxpayer money being spent on dealing with a communicable disease that could have been mitigated by upstream public health investments. And additionally, health equity investments can help break cycles of poverty, chronic disease, early morbidity early on, so that they don't then become greater immense costs on a social safety net, which is of course then taxpayer dollars. Now, as we talk about these things internally, we're using very academic language here. But I wanted to give some real world examples of ways that I've advised folks to talk about this, and then ways that you can talk about it as well. I was advising what went on to be a winning school board candidate and talking about equity issues in a community that was very adverse to the word equity and to hearing about it. And this person was very steeped in the academic terminology of equity and was trying to talk about it. And what I said is, here's how I talk about it. You know, if you're talking to someone about schools, I'd say to a voter at the door or someone that you're asking to support you for school board, that we all know that there are some kids whose parents are doing everything they can to get them all the opportunities they can. They're going to have tutors. They're going to have an SAT coach. They're going to have weekend and summer classes. And we all know that those kids are going to have the tools they need to succeed in school, go on to post-secondary education if that's the right move for them, and pursue a fantastic career. And that's great. How fantastic for our community that we have parents that are doing the utmost for their kids. We also know that there are kids whose parents are doing everything they can, but they're working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Maybe their parents didn't go to college and they don't necessarily have certain habits around schoolwork to impart onto their kids. They're not able to afford a tutor or an SAT coach, let alone extracurriculars outside of school. And we all know that those kids aren't going to get the same opportunities. And that's going to limit some of the chances that they have in life. And that's not right. That's not fair. Every kid who goes to our schools should be getting a great education and opportunities in life. And we found that talking about health equity in that way resonated deeply with voters who either would be unfamiliar with the term or react negatively to it, because we were talking about something that seems self-evidently true to the entire community. Within the context of public health, one thing that I'm sure you all are talking about regularly is the critical need to invest in care for expectant families and newborns. And I think you can talk about how if we help make sure that a child has a healthy beginning in life, that makes them healthier throughout their entire life, it creates healthy habits so that they can do better in school. There can be a greater chance that they go to college or post-secondary education, they get a great job in our community, and decreases the chances that they find themselves in trouble or create any number of situations that hurt them, their families, our community, and are extremely costly. Again, that's something that will resonate as self-evident to most people without having to use a lot of academic terminology. One great example for community benefits is an example of a free vision screening and glasses clinic to any child 19 or younger in a community. Now, of course, this is extremely beneficial to the kids that directly receive that care. But since it's universal, it can be taken advantage of by people who don't necessarily need it in any traditional sense, but who wouldn't want to save a few bucks. Additionally, if we think about the dramatic improvement in quality of life for a child who was undiagnosed, struggling with vision issues, the chance that they can then thrive in school where they were probably struggling, chance that they'll be able to succeed in school and that'll carry over into career opportunities. And the extent to which we know that those career opportunities can then have a huge benefit on their health throughout their life. It's an opportunity to say, by making this investment here and now, we're going to be helping families thrive for many, many years in a way that's going to save our community money and help make it a more vibrant community with greater economic opportunity. talking about investing now in a way that benefits us in the long term. Of course, many health equity programs are functional universal programs, although of course not all, and everyone means everyone. If there is that free childhood screening glasses program, everyone could access it, which is something that people can feel positively about, even if they don't end up using it. Maybe you have a free vaccine clinic. I understand vaccines are, of course, extremely politicized, but maybe you have one. Everyone could use it, even if they choose not to. Everyone could use a monthly community walking program, even if they choose not. So that's speaking about self-interest around health equity in the positive. Now let's pivot and talk about self-interest around self-equity in the negative, thinking about social determinants of health and the academic term downstream problems they use. To put it in less academic language, ways that we can help people be healthier now that will help make the entire community more vibrant and help it grow economically later. So we flashed up a graphic about the economic determinants of health, and those are economic stability, education access and quality, healthcare access and quality, neighborhood and built environment, and social and community context. A few examples of these social determinants of health include things like access to nutritious food, which I'll dig into in more detail in a moment, racism, discrimination, and violence, polluted air and water, language and literacy skills, education and job opportunities, and safe housing and transportation. So let's dig into that example of access to nutritious foods, which is, of course, tied to health risks and outcomes like heart disease, diabetes, and high blood pressure. If someone doesn't have access to a grocery store in their community where they can buy the food, they might be an hour-long bus ride with 2 transfers away to a grocery store. And that relates to neighborhood and built environment, it's going to decrease the likelihood they're accessing nutrition. Maybe they don't have adequate money to purchase healthy food. Maybe they don't have the time, skills, and materials to cook and store healthy food. That speaks to social and community context, built environment, economic stability, and education access and quality. So all of these things will factor into a greater likelihood that there's a higher instance of diabetes or heart disease in a community, which of course has all sorts of downstream negative effects. So this is discussing this issue in terms of very academic language. But if we were to try to cast it in more language that's going to seem commonplace, if you were to say the county is going to try to make sure that young kids and families get access to healthy food, because if families are eating healthier, they can thrive at the job and they can thrive in school, which is going to make our entire community more successful. We know, of course, that just promoting healthy choices alone won't eliminate other health disparities. I think a couple of folks mentioned that they don't want to just talk about health equity. They want to take action on it. So we're going to pivot next to narrative framing, how it is we can talk about health equity in a way that'll help move various folks to action. So we've been talking about throughout this entire training how terms like equity have become politicized, and there was a very last post-it on how do we talk about health equity without using the word health equity. We've gone a little bit around how to speak to folks' self-interest, how they might benefit in the positive, or how they might avoid risk in the negative. Again, the most tangible risk avoidance being communicable disease. But we can also just simply use different words. The vast majority of people really resonate with the values of health equity, things like fairness, things like their community thriving and being successful. So it could be as simple as saying, well, we think Oregon's public health system should be fair for everyone, regardless of their background. That's something that almost anyone in your community who's engaging in good faith, and we'll talk a little bit later about people who are not engaging in good faith because we know that they exist, will resonate with and agree with. I said we'd circle back to statutory requirements and Oregon's public health goals, because one very useful tool you have is to make someone else the villain. If many of you mentioned struggles around health equity communication within your county itself. Maybe it's an HR staff, or maybe it's someone in leadership, maybe it's an elected official in your county. You have the opportunity to make someone else the villain. This is a statutory requirement put in place by the legislature. There are federal and statewide requirements requiring you to take these action and endeavor towards these goals. That's out of your hands. It's simply something that you all must do in order to be in compliance, have access to certain resources. So you have the opportunity to make someone else the villain and help use that to be persuasive to get what you need to advance health equity goals. Finally, we have the opportunity, and I see a hand, I'll get to that in just a moment. We have the opportunity to personalize it, whether it's a vivid example of someone who benefited immensely from a service that your county provides, or literally a personal example from your life that you can use when communicating about health equity that will make it come alive. So an example could be someone saying, oh, my brother had a job with benefits, but he wasn't able to afford his child's dental care needs. So he used a publicly available dental clinic. That was able to dramatically improve his child's oral health, which removed a key distraction, making it difficult for his child to thrive in school, and had a huge benefit in making his kid healthier and happier, which increases the chances that he can thrive in school and be on the track towards a great life. That type of real example from someone you've served at your county or even from your life can really be helpful in guiding conversations around health equity. If you have the time, you can hit on all these points. You can talk about the positive benefits of health equity, the risk mitigation. You can make someone else the villain, and you can use different words along with personal examples. If we've got time, and Melissa, maybe you can do a quick time check on me. I'd love to speak to a couple concerns I heard come out in the breakout groups and give some concrete examples. But before that, Jennifer, I see you with your hand up.
Yeah, really quick, just a hypothetical cautionary tale that I have heard is particularly during COVID, we absolutely did use the tactic of making someone else the villain on the local level. And in some ways it was extremely helpful, I will say. However, in the climate that we're in now, at least for some rural counties, there are, and not even just public health, like this has happened with some of my peers in other departments in the county, when we said like, oh, it's a state requirement. And then commissioner said, well, maybe we'll just give that department back to the state. So we just, a cautionary tale for the people who you need to know the politics of where you're functioning before you make some of these statements.
Absolutely true. We're going to dig a little later into, getting a read on elected officials and dealing with some of those issues. I see Sarah with a hand up.
Yeah, I would just suggest when that happens to remind them that if they choose to do that, then OHA will be in charge of public health in their county, and they would have a lot more control over it if they keep their public health authority. So, but thanks for bringing that up, Jennifer. It's important.
I'd love to dig into a couple examples. I don't know, Melissa, if we're ahead of time or right on track of time. I don't want us to go over. You all have been so generous to give us a couple hours in your morning, but I'd love to dig into some examples if we have a minute.
I think let's dig into some examples, and then if we end up feeling a little tight on time for the second breakout group, we'll shorten it from 30 minutes to 20. So
perfect. One thing I heard a couple folks mention was a pushback. It could be from someone internally in your county. It could be from a member of the public, believing that if one is pursuing a health equity goal, whether or not you all use the term equity, that, oh, you all don't care about the majority. They might put it in explicitly racial terms in terms of populations you do or do not care about. And that, you don't want to serve the people in the county. It sounds like that's something that you all have received as pushback numerous times. I think when addressing a concern like that, the first thing you want to do is untie the knot of not validating what the person's saying, because of course that's not true and there's numerous things we don't want to agree with in what they've said, but making that person nevertheless feel heard. So one thing that I advise a lot of candidates to do, if someone says something that you could not disagree with more, but you're still trying to find a way to connect with them, use phrases that make them feel heard without actually agreeing with what they said. Phrases like, I've heard people say that, I hear you. Allow you to indicate that you're hearing what they say without stating agreement to a premise that you simply can't agree to. Another thing that when a person says that, many people, I'm not necessarily saying that they're evil people, they understand that that's something that you might react negative to, that they're upset and they understand that they're saying something that you might find upsetting. And what I find candidates that I've advised have used that diffuses the situation a lot is you indicating that you understand many people are of that opinion. Again, you don't want to agree to a premise or agree to an opinion that you don't, but saying something as simple as, I hear that, you know, a couple people mentioned that to me last week at XYZ meeting I was at. You're saying to this person, I don't think that you're alone or a strange outlier. I've heard other people share your opinion. You're acknowledging that they're one of a group of people, one of a community. Again, you can't validate their concern, but you can pivot to something you want to talk about in the positive that allows you to speak to sort of what's under their concern. So what's under that concern is the belief that they're not going to get the resources they need to thrive in life if they're engaging in good faith. We'll talk a little bit later about how to deal with people in the media section who, you know, are engaging from an entirely adversarial position. But if they're remotely engaging in good faith, they're coming from a concern that they and what they perceive as their community aren't going to get the resources that they need to succeed. So saying something as simple as, I hear what you're saying. I heard a couple of people say that to me at XYZ community meeting I was at last week. We all want to make sure that our county has what it needs to succeed, including the critical healthcare services that we need. That's why we believe that the community's health, that our county's public health program needs to be fair for everyone. And we need to make sure that, and then you pivot to what you want to talk about in the positive. That's why we're working on making sure that all families with young kids have county resources to make sure their kids start out healthy so they can be healthy for life and thrive in school. And those kids can go on to have great careers, because that's something we want for all of our families. So to repeat, you start with not agreeing with what they said, but acknowledging that you hear them, speaking to the fact that you've heard other people say that before, so you're not making them feel isolated in their opinion. Speak to a concern underlying their concern, if that makes sense. Speak to how you could understand how a person could have the emotional reaction they're having without using those words. And then pivot to the positive thing you want to talk about, using that community benefits language, how everyone will benefit, that universal language. And then again, not using the word equity, talking about fairness and pivoting it back to what it is that you want to talk about. I don't know if we've got to get moving on to the next slide, but I don't know if there's other reactions or questions folks have.
That's great, Ethan. I think we'll probably keep moving along. I think those are some really helpful, tangible ways that folks can take this into their work, though. Thank you for sharing those. I think Lizzie's going to introduce the next section.
All right. So to follow up on how we define community benefits and risks and narrative framing, now we're going to share with you communications tools for interacting with 3 different audiences you're likely to communicate with, and how to think about the best ways to share messages that resonate with them. So those 3 audiences are elected officials, which includes how to research their potential political stance, especially on issues relating to public health and health equity, and how to frame an issue to fit what we know about them. And then also to how to maintain an ongoing relationship, knowing that those are really important to keep. Next is the media, including questions to ask when a reporter calls you about a story, how to frame your messages to fit into a narrative someone else is telling, and also other general media considerations. And then lastly, we'll talk about the general public, your community, including engaging on social media and your website through public events and partner outreach. And this will include a sort of more proactive approach to establishing your message. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide.
Thanks for that introduction, Lizzie. So to start, I want to share just a few best practices when it comes to engaging with elected officials generally. First, do not surprise them. If your office is doing something or is going to do something That's probably going to generate local press, or it's going to get people to pick up the phone and call and ask what is going on. Give them a heads up that it's coming. Ideally, tell them why it's happening. And even more ideally, offer 1 or 2 short responses that they can give if they're asked about it. You want to make it really easy for them to be an ally. And one of the ways to do that is to tell them in advance so they know it's coming. It's also a really good idea to just establish a regular cadence of updates with elected officials, whether that's weekly, monthly, quarterly, or annually, as appropriate, depending on the office and your relationship with them. But again, don't limit yourself to that check-in if there's something urgent that's coming up. It's not a good idea to wait a week just because you already have your quarterly update going with them. They'd rather get 2 emails from you. And I say that as someone who gets too many emails. Also, be respectful, use proper titles, and be kind and considerate with staff. Unless you have a close personal relationship with them, it's good to err on the side of being too formal. And if you do have a close relationship, it's still a good idea to use their official titles up until the point when they tell you not to. You need to be flexible. Sometimes meetings get rescheduled at the last minute, or they end up being with staff instead of the elected official. Don't act put out, don't cancel the meeting, brief the staff, provide your availability in case they have follow-up questions. And just really keep in mind that staff are gatekeepers for the elected officials that they work for. And you should safeguard your relationships with them by being respectful to them, being respectful of their time, and following their office rules. Be timely. In fact, be early. I am not a person that's early to things. I am early when I'm meeting with elected officials. And do not run over your meeting time that you've been given with them. That's a good way to make an enemy of their staff or of the person who's waiting to talk to them, whose meeting is now shorter because you went over. Also, provide timely follow-ups. If during the conversation you said you'd give them a little bit more information, provide it within 24 hours of the meeting, and ideally by the end of the day of the meeting, with just a brief 1 or 2 sentences. Hey, I know when we were talking about this, I said I'd send that study over. Here it is. Okay, so now you have that out of the way. You're polite, you're timely, got the meeting scheduled. So how can you effectively communicate with them? Well, the first step is to, before you actually engage with them, do some research. The good thing is people who have successfully run for office, there's usually a lot of information that's publicly available about them and how they feel about things. So even small local candidates have campaign statements, they have social media posts, and they may have local news stories written about them and specifically about their views and values. If you know that you're going to be going before your local county commission or state legislative committee, and you're unfamiliar with the members that you're going to be talking to, ask other folks in your office or other CLHO members for their advice. Politicians tend to get a reputation for what they act like and how they vote really rapidly. So it's a good idea to talk with someone who has experience interacting with them. You can visit their campaign website if they have one, and try to get a feel for their values around health equity, particularly for the health equity issue that you're there to talk to them about. If they don't have a campaign website, you can look at their candidate statement on either the local county election page or on the Secretary of State site. And then a lot of candidates use their social media accounts as sort of quasi-campaign websites. Check and see if they have one specific for their job or a personal one, or if they use both. Be aware that they may not use the word equity when talking about health equity topics. You can look for words like everyone or all children or the care they deserve or universal. And you may also find as part of this research that they actively dislike the word equity or are against health equity principles in some way or in certain circumstances. For example, they may have strong beliefs about restricting reproductive health care access or statements about health services that frame things as us versus them, with one group getting more or better services at the expense of others. This is really valuable information that'll help shape your approach to the meeting. And also remember that there are a lot of people who dislike the word equity who really care about equitable health results. They want all babies to be healthy. They want all kids to succeed. They want to prevent the spread of illness or the development of chronic disease in their community. Tread carefully with your language, especially in public with this group, and remember that they're your allies and should be approached as such. In the same sorts of places, campaign websites, candidate statements, social media posts, you'll find their stated priorities, and you can see if those align with your needs. If you can align their priorities with your priorities, you can use that to advance your issue. Also wanted to just share like a few pieces of political jargon, all of which you may already be familiar with, just as part of that research when you're trying to figure out how it relates to your work. So if someone says they're pro-life, They're opposed to abortion and in some cases birth control, but they may be good allies for expanded pregnancy, infant, and children's services. If they talk about being against the governor's COVID controls and they don't like state or federal mandates, can mean that they're really supportive of the local health department making decisions for their own community. If they talk about being anti-vax, they might fundamentally disagree with vaccines or at least vaccine mandates or requirements, but it could mean that they believe in an individual's right to choose healthcare options for themselves. If they're talking about healthcare for all, that means that they're interested in expanding healthcare coverage, usually by the creation or expansion of government-run healthcare systems. So they might be allies when it comes to expanding access, particularly around expanding access to preventative care. If they talk about being against climate change, or they might mean that they don't think the climate's changing, or more likely that they think it's just part of a natural cycle that's not primarily driven by human activity. So even if they don't think that humans are causing it, they can still understand the impacts of extreme weather events and pollution and how they've impacted their community. Sometimes climate or environmental regulations come up because they're worried about impacts on businesses, which could mean they're really receptive to some of those social determinants of health around economic inequality. If they talk about personal responsibility, they might be more supportive of a user pays type system, and they might be less receptive, some of those social determinants of health, and think that you made your own decisions and should reap the rewards or consequences, but they might be good allies for services that protect innocent third parties. So just try to take a really broad view of what they're saying so you can find and incorporate their priorities and values into your work. And know that it might be piecemeal. They might be a really good ally on one thing and not a great one on another. And that's just fine when you're there to talk about services. They don't have to be your friend all the time, which goes back to being respectful. You also can find their past actions. So don't get too caught up in what they're saying. Look at what they've actually done. Sometimes it's great to look at what the job they had before they entered politics and think about how that might have shaped their worldview or exposed them to some of these health equity issues. And also look at their voting record on recent items that had health equity impacts. That's a good way to find common ground. So once you've found a way to connect, build on that to get them on your side. Politicians can make powerful allies. They can provide additional funding, staff support, and aligning other services to support you and your work. If you're meeting with or presenting to them, it's a great opportunity to demonstrate your value and the value of the programming you're there to talk about. It's a good idea to start your sentence with value statements like, I know you believe in X and I do too, or I understand one of your priorities is Y and I support that because, or it aligns with our work in this way. Sometimes, particularly with folks who think health equity is unfair, it's helpful to reframe the issue in a way that they can support or offer an analogy to help them see it in a different way. For example, you could share, if a student's struggling to read aloud in class, it helps the student to get pulled out and offered personalized evaluation and support. And perhaps they'll benefit from speech therapy, or they have an undiagnosed learning disability, or they just need a little bit of extra help. And obviously, helping that student learn and grow as a reader is valuable to them. They'll do better in school. They might have better economic activities. But also giving them that personalized care frees up the teacher to continue with the lesson for the rest of the class. So without that extra support, we either have an entire class whose overall progress is slowed down, or we have a student who never masters reading, which limits their job prospects, earning potential, and impacts the local economy, and could potentially impact their children's ability to read. So then lean into your example, ideally on an issue that you know they care about, and say, similarly, by providing extra support to A, B, and C communities, we've been able to. Another thing is these are often technically complex subjects and elected officials don't know everything. Anyone who knows elected officials already knew that last part, but nobody does, right? So explain it in simple terms and provide in-depth information that they can go through at their leisure. Always start at the beginning. Don't assume that they know anything until they've told you otherwise or you've told them already. And use your limited time to make sure they have a good understanding of the issue, and then follow up to provide reliable resources that they can learn more if they're interested. Whenever possible, if you can frame issues as kitchen table issues that they can discuss with constituents, give them something that's really tangible that exemplifies how this is a quality of life improvement for their community. For example, if you give an example of last year, we implemented a single elementary school flu vaccine clinic in October. And that year we saw a 10% reduction in wintertime absences, which means 10% fewer parents are staying home with their kids who are sick. And that's why we want to take it countywide, right? Really help them see how this is going to impact folks in their community that they can tell when they're asked about it. Also use real examples whenever possible, especially ones that are hard hitting, to ensure that they see that human impact. And this goes back to using accessible language. If you're speaking to them in too technical of a manner, you're not going to connect with them as people. So humanize and personalize the impacts of your work. If you're implementing a program to improve birth outcomes in your community, tell them how many babies died before their first birthdays in your county in the last 10 years, and then tell them how many would be alive today if this program had been implemented in 2013. In terms of winning over opposition or building up allies, health equity work has the advantage of being literally life or death. So use that to your advantage by talking about it. Don't shy away from the brutal impacts of health disparities. So now that you've hopefully found common ground, time to reframe the issue. I know Ethan talked about this a little bit earlier, but talk about the direct impacts on the community, especially if you can back it up with compelling data. Providing them with that data is another one of those tangible touch points that they can share with colleagues or constituents when they're asked about it. Also, you've done your research on them, you've found common ground. Don't undermine that work by using terms or phrases that you know they don't like. It is a much better use of your time to get them to pass, fund, or implement health equity programs than it is to get them to like the word equity. And again, align with their beliefs. You've looked up what their values are. Show them how they're your natural ally. Show them how this promotes their own priorities. But sometimes you do all these things and it doesn't work, which brings us to our last point: know when to stop. Be especially cautious in public settings. You don't want to burn bridges. If it's going poorly, say you'd like to gather some resources to share with members and come back to finish the presentation in a few weeks. Moving that conversation behind closed doors can enable you to speak more openly without embarrassing or upsetting anyone publicly. Ideally, these conversations happen in advance, but obviously sometimes things come up in committee or in conversations or other public settings sort of unexpectedly, or they take a turn in a way you weren't expecting. If it's going terribly, know when to stop talking. Or at the very least, follow up with members after the presentation or after the event and say what you wish you'd said, right? Provide the additional information or clarification or context, or ask to meet with them another time to provide that. It is very unlikely that you're only ever going to interact with this person one time. Do not poison a multi-year relationship for a short-term one-off win. Above all else, protect the long-term relationship for the office, and be sure to be kind and courteous, knowing that you're going to be back in front of them at some point. Personal disputes can prevent you from effectively advocating for your job and your programming. Usually people rise above petty things and do what's right for their community, but it's not unheard of for personality conflicts to end up impacting funding decisions. So it's important to play nice. Also, sometimes you're just never going to find common ground. If your commissioner is an avowed anti-vaxxer who believes vaccines literally contain poison, they're not going to fund your vaccine clinic. If you have an adamant anti-abortion advocate, they're not going to vote to expand abortion services because you showed them data that there's growing demand. You cannot reason people out of these sorts of deeply held beliefs, but you can turn it into a personal dispute that undermines your overall relationship with the office. So when you come up to adamant opposition, think about if you really need their support. Is there another commissioner? Is there another legislator? Is there someone else you can go to instead? Is there another path forward that isn't through them? If you don't need them, provide them with some basic information or a chance to ask questions, but don't overengage so you don't draw unnecessary attention. Now I'm going to hand it over to Ethan, who's going to talk about the media.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, hopefully a lot of this guidance is helpful, but some of it might sort of sound very simple and self-evident, but as you'll see in our hypotheticals, and as I'm sure you've seen doing your work, in practice, it's a lot easier said than done. So again, early next week, we're going to have examples to you all around some of the things we'll talk about here in paid media, great examples about how you can do research and engage with elected officials, and tangible tools for putting a lot of this in practice, which is where it gets hard. Now talking about media, we'll start with paid media. So examples could include if your agency or county has a standing piece in a local publication, excuse me, if there's given outlets where you might regularly run community announcements or public service statements. Obviously, there are budget considerations with paid media. This isn't free. It does allow one to reach a very large audience. That this type of thing is most effective if it's very time sensitive. If there's a key action that speaks to a cogent current issue that the public will react to, if you have the opportunity to place an ad in a local newspaper, do any sort of public advertisement that's going to reach a large number of people. Moving on over, please. The next we have place media, and we're going to have some resources that some of you might have even seen before, shared out early next week around guest editorials and letters to the editor. This is something that a lot of the clients I advise around Oregon and in other states are finding harder and harder. As you all might be aware, there are fewer and fewer community newspapers and outlets that are running letters to the editor, guest editorials, but they do still absolutely exist. Those that do exist are understaffed and have fewer opportunities for that voice to be heard. Additionally, if this is a tool that you overuse or don't tie to, like paid media, a very time-sensitive, cogent issue, you're just not going to generate a lot of interest. So make sure that this is something you use sparingly and that it's a major issue that a lot of people are concerned about. That'll increase the likelihood that a press outlet will actually run your piece. It'll increase the likelihood that your piece will resonate with the public. And again, we'll have follow-up resources about how to do letters to the editor and editorials. Of course, this is a way to do media that, other than the time involved, is free and that you're in total control over the content. You're not in control over whether an outlet chooses to run your guest editorial letter to the editor, but you're totally in control of your message. It also, unlike a tweet or a piece of social media, which we'll also be sharing some resources about social media early next week, it's something that allows a longer form argument. You can make a more nuanced point over time. Next, please. Next is earned media. That's where you all are developing the story. You're sending out a press release. You're sending out an opportunity for a press availability or an event where the press can come see something that's happening or ask questions. Now, as we're going to talk about in a moment with reactive media, it's likely that your county has in place procedures around dealing with the press departments, spokespeople, public information officers. Obviously, one of the most important things is, not unlike Melissa said, with elected officials, to consider relationships and to be respectful of your county's process for engaging with the media. But if you have an idea for a particular thing that your department is doing that could generate some positive press, take it to the relevant people and use their procedures. If there's a lot of interest in this, we can follow up with resources around to suggest press releases and prepare a lot of these materials. This is, again, something you have a certain amount of control over. You're developing the story. You're giving the materials to the press for them to put the message that you want out there to the public. There are, of course, two huge major barriers with earned media. One, the possibility that you just don't generate any interest. The press can take it or leave it. You can hold a press conference, but no one has to arrive and cover what you're saying. And then two, there ultimately is less control. That you can put all the materials you want together for the press, but they can choose to take it in a new direction, take it out of its context, take part of what you said and spin it any way that they want. So it is significantly riskier to engage in earned media. Finally, we have reactive media, and we're going to have a whole resource for this in your inbox early next week. That's for when the press is coming to you. You have not initiated contact with the press. They're coming to you. Again, use caution. You don't want to offend anyone in your community or say the wrong thing. And again, use caution based on the internal bureaucracy of your county. They likely have a number of procedures around how to respond to press inquiries and who should receive them and who should approve any content that goes out. The most common mistake folks made when approached by the media is to not ask enough questions. And that's what the resource we're going to send early next week really digs into. But from the most basic questions of who are you, what publication do you work for, what is your deadline, what is the story about, who else are you talking to for the story, and a variety of other questions. it gives you a sense of what the reporter's bent is, what the story's about, and how you might want to engage, or if you don't want to engage, because again, not everyone is engaging with you in good faith, and what recommendation you might want to make to folks internally in your county. When preparing a quote, you want to use immense caution. We're going to have some resources in your inbox about how you might put that together. But in a panic situation, the press usually isn't coming to you because everything's going great. Tensions can be very high. So having a crisis communications plan in place prior to there being a problem can make it much, much easier if, God forbid, something awful is to happen. So making sure that everyone in your department has a sense of what the chain of command and the procedures are if there's a crisis and the press is reaching out. Having basic language for quotes and statements pre-written and ready to go, so you can just plug in the specifics of the exact situation, will help alleviate a lot of tension in the case of reacting to media when a crisis is happening. With that, I'll throw it on over to Lizzie, who will talk about addressing the community.
Okay. So we're going to hustle through this last one, and then we're going to get into our second set of breakout groups for a little bit more hands-on activity. But so with your community, you interact in a variety of ways. And these are just a couple of examples. I'm sure that you all have your own ways of interacting with your local communities, but that could include attending public events like a street fair, or hosting a town hall or a clinic or an open house. It could be through specific partnership meetings with community organizations, or it could be directly to individuals through proactive outreach on social media or your website. And so I'm going to give some examples as we go through this, but I want to give the caveat that I'll be sharing tools and how to engage. And I want to make sure that you understand my examples should be taken with a grain of salt. I'm using these to demonstrate the way these tools can be applied, and much less using them as real life scenarios. So when we're talking about health equity and other politically contentious issues, these tools that I'm about to talk through will help you stay your course in sharing your intentions about health equity outcomes without necessarily claiming that something is quote unquote about health equity or potentially inequitable. So first, establish your goal. And also to the point that was made earlier by Jennifer, know your context, right? So if you know that your folks are going to be unreceptive to a conversation about vaccines, accept it and shape your goal around that. So always have your internal goal behind your communication to allow you to remain focused, right? At a public event, your goal might be to push back on false information, or on social media, it could be to expand reach about a new program, or just to simply establish a new relationship with a partner organization. Sometimes it's okay to name your goal externally if you think your audience is going to be receptive to that. But other times your goal may be different from what you're actually going to say. This sounds simple, but it's really important as a first step to make sure that however you're preparing to communicate actually falls in lines with the goals that you've set, and it doesn't veer off course. This goal should always include staying above the fray. So if someone wants to talk politics or make false claims, your goal should include correcting misinformation and staying away from politicizing your topic even further. So next, we're going to define what you're talking about. With complex and political topics, remember to lean on simple, easy to understand language. I like to say 8th grade level. This is not to diminish the intelligence of who you're speaking to, but more so to help people understand, to bring them in, to feel comfortable, and to help them not to get defensive. We also don't want to assume that who we're speaking to already has the knowledge that we have. And we have to recognize that some words are weighted and can also be misconstrued, not to mention, with their political weight. So it's okay, right? We can work with this if we understand that some people don't like certain words and therefore we don't have to use them. The words Climate change, for example, I know you all talk about in your work, and not all counties want to use that phrase, but everyone in Oregon, everyone in your county has felt the impact of a climate-related weather event or an extreme weather event, however it is that you want to put that. So by using a slightly different, less politically fraught phrase, we can get on the same page about the impacts of droughts, wildfires, floods, storms, and that allows us to move past the politics and just talk about what's happening in the community. So here's an example of what it looks like to use your goal and to define what you're talking about together. So here's a scenario. Jennifer, I'm going to use Klamath County as an example. It's not personal. This is just what came up in my mind. So for example, Jennifer is at a town hall or public event where people are getting riled up about conversations around climate change in Klamath County. And they've experienced significant and problematic drought where the community needs new solutions to their water shortage challenges. In this case, Jennifer's goal is to move away from climate change debates and discuss equitable solutions to the community problem. So here's how I suggest Jennifer kind of intervene in this cycle of disagreement and get to the heart of the point. So what we're talking about here is drought. We all know that our community is a place that is drought prone, and it's caused real and significant challenges for our county. This is a public health concern because we know that low-income people, including seniors on fixed budgets and people making minimum wage, might get left behind in our discussions around improving water systems if individuals have to pay into a fund to get access to the local well. This could cause access challenges for those who need clean drinking water in their homes and cannot afford to pay. Drought impacts all of us, and we will all benefit from making sure that everyone in our community is able to access clean drinking water as we adapt to hotter summers, lower snowpack, and longer seasonal water shortages. So what we did there was we talked about climate change. We did, but more so we talked about the problem that it's having on the community and brought the conversation back to what the goal is of where we need to go and how it impacts public health. So next, we want to lead with values, and you can use your core responsibilities here too. So Ethan rightly pointed out earlier that sometimes it's easier to make someone else the villain, and that can, in some cases, as we've learned, be a shared value too. And so it's important to also understand your audience's values or acknowledge your other values that are existing in your conversations. And so if an audience may not be receptive to a conversation about health equity or some other topic that may be politically contentious, use values to explain. For example, you could say, as the public health administrator, I show up to work every day because I believe that Oregonians deserve to be healthy. One of our core obligations as the public health department is to maintain the health of the community, though I hear varying interests in using a seasonal day shelter for other purposes in the off seasons. I propose that we work together to discuss meeting the entire community's needs around building a day shelter that can be used in the summer and winter for hot and cold temperature respite, and to use the space for another community purpose in the fall and spring. You can also echo their values, which could sound something like this. I hear you that building a new shelter costs money, and we've recently had to cut back on other services that matter to you. The good news is, once we have a day shelter constructed, we can use it for other health services when we're not experiencing extreme weather. The reason we had to reduce our vaccine clinic hours was because we lost our second location to a new tenant. Having a dedicated space would allow us to protect community members in need when it's particularly hot or cold, and would give us a county-owned location to base other health programs. Or you could use a community-focused perspective. For example, in our county, our community stands up for each other. This means that making sure our county has a cooling shelter in the summer and a warming shelter in the winter, which is a key component of ensuring people who are experiencing homelessness are able to stay healthy and safe. Okay, last tool. I think, ironically, it's funny that communications professionals like to say, show, don't tell, because we just talk all the time, right? But when we're talking about health equity, it is better to show the importance of health equity through the proof rather than to tell someone it's important and they should just believe you. So this could include using local examples and personal stories or outcomes from certain programs that demonstrate community benefit, which would be demonstrating more community outcomes than just the service that the people who the service is provided to. You could also use data and research. And though this can be politicized, we have to continue to lean on the facts, and these are always going to be defensible. And this is actually particularly useful with social media and posting online, where you can have a small window of space or, a small number of words, but you can call out a quick data point that shows how or why equitable outcomes serve the community through the lens of, say, the social determinants of health. Finally, we're going to get a little bit more into this in our next round of breakouts, so we'll apply these examples there.
Thanks, Lizzie. So we're going to jump to our second breakout group now. We're a little bit past time, so I think what I'm recommending we do is let's go to the breakout rooms for maybe like 17 minutes, Laura, and just pull us back when we have a couple of minutes left. And when we share out the presentation, we'll also share out the Jamboard so you can see what other groups worked on. But I think it's a little bit more valuable to just have a little bit more time in the groups instead of time doing a lot of reporting on what folks did. We do want to give a brief disclaimer for this activity. We're going to show you 3 different case studies, or you'll be able to think through how to apply some of the tools we talked about. We just want to say these are fictional examples. They may sound similar to reality or issues that public health professionals have to navigate, but they're purposely not factual. So this is sort of our Law and Order ripped from the headlines. This isn't really about you warning. They represent things that can be dynamic challenges, and we want you to use these tools to talk about health equity narratives, community benefits, shared risks, and applying the communication skills. So we're going to be in the same groups that we were in before. After you've gone through so that your moderator will read a case study. There's some bullet points summarizing the case study on your Jamboard. And then we can talk about maybe how we'd reframe that narrative, how we talk about it in another way, different words we'd use, and also how we can talk about some of those shared community benefits and risks. So group 1 will be with me again. We'll be going over a WIC funding case study. Group 2 will be with Ethan again. You'll be discussing a sex education case study. And group 3 will be with Lizzie again. You'll be discussing farm worker outreach case study. Let me stop sharing. And then I think if we could, just come back when there's 2 or 3 minutes left, and we'll just do a quick wrap up then.
Okay, I'm opening the rooms up now.
All right, welcome back. Looks like we're just sort of collecting the rest of the group here. So we just have a couple of minutes. Does anyone want to touch on very high level experiences from the case studies? Okay, I'm just gonna let it lie. We will share out our deck after this. We'll also share out all the notes from the Jamboard sessions. I was really impressed and happy to hear that in our example about farm worker, public health access and services, many counties are doing a lot of work to provide that access and have been having good success and not too much resistance from the community or elected officials. So good work to everyone. Thank you again for being here today. This 2 hours did go by really quickly. I hope that you were able to glean something from this presentation. Thank you so much, Chloe, for letting us offer this presentation to you. And again, we will be presenting or sharing out these materials by the end of day Monday to make sure that you're equipped with tangible skills moving forward. And just want to say thank you.
And Lizzie, how will they receive the feedback survey?
Oh, we'll include that in our packet of materials. So the feedback survey will just be a couple of questions to let us know how we did, and that'll be included with that email. And Sadie, I see you have a hand raised.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. In the materials that we're gonna get, is there gonna be any notes on when we're engaging with people who are engaging in like not good faith? Does that get touched on at all? Because I was actually really looking forward to hearing what you all had to say about that.
Yeah, we will have some notes about how to manage those moments. So happy to share in the toolkit. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great Friday and hope you have a restful weekend.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.